In the heart of Central Asia, surrounded by the highest mountains on Earth, soars the immense natural fortress of Tibet. Its extraordinary altitudes, nearly 3 miles up in the sky, have caused Tibet to be called the roof of the world. Some of its passes teeter at over 20,000 feet above sea level. 2/3 of this vast, storm-swept land lies at 15,000 feet or more. The climate of the Great Northern Plateau is extremely severe, with temperatures plunging to a low of -44 degrees. Yet within these dangerous frontiers evolved a remarkable way of life. On this lofty land lived a community almost totally isolated from outside influences. Until 1951, Tibet remained a place unique in the world. It was called the Forbidden Land. Trespassers wishing to enter were turned away by the harsh climate or the deadly mountains. Here Tibetans developed a separate language, alphabet, literature, culture, and a unique religion based on Buddhism, with its own spiritual and governmental leader, the Dalai Lama. To the outside world, isolationism meant backwardness. Outsiders saw Tibet as being deprived of modern conveniences, but Tibetans found it more convenient to wade through streams than to build bridges, or use fire instead of electricity to cook the evening meal. It was this very isolationism that made Tibet attractive to trespassers. In 1951, Tibet disappeared from the map when it was invaded by the People's Republic of China. This invasion was barely noticed as people anxiously watched the events unfolding in the Korean War. A large country swallowing up a small one in the most remote region of the globe did not seem worthy of the attention of a world engulfed in strife. In reality, the civilization of the Tibetan people was disappearing before the eyes of the world. To appreciate the struggle of the Tibetan people against oppression by the Chinese, an understanding of Tibetan history is needed. The economic and political developments of Tibet exhibits historical similarities with the developments that were taking place in Europe at the same time. Between the 5th and 9th centuries AD, both Tibet and Western Europe were characterized by the role of feudal monastics. Their economies were dominated by similar patterns of agriculture and landholding systems, including the raising of sheep and cattle. Striking religious comparisons can be made. Both in Tibet and Western Europe, indigenous religious practices based on oral traditions remain strong, while a great universal religion, Christianity on one hand and Buddhism on the other, were beginning to establish themselves. On both sides, great religions overwhelmed the masses. The government in both situations was ruled by religious leaders, the Catholic Church in Europe and the Lamas monasteries in Tibet. Due to the opening of trade routes in Europe, different cultures and backgrounds interacted, causing the expansion of empires. This brought about the Renaissance. Because of Tibet's dangerous, often deadly mountains, traders from other countries avoided Tibet, and no comparable Renaissance ever occurred. As time passed, the hierarchs of Tibet, the Gelugpa sect, became known as the Yellow Hats. This sect's religious leader, the Dalai Lama, became the leader of the entire country. The Yellow Hats continued to maintain an uninterrupted monastic state from 1578 until the Chinese occupation in 1951. The Wheel of Life, an example of the unique Tibetan Buddhism, symbolizes the ever-returning chance to improve one's being in a fresh incarnation. This provides a distinctive approach to human existence in the passage of time. For this reason, Tibetans believe time is best applied in meditation and prayer, looking towards the ultimate release and achieving nirvana. To the outside world, Tibet was a backward and feudal society, and Tibetans acknowledged some need of social reform. But by all accounts, it was a country where people were content with their lives and nourished by deeply rewarding spiritual values. The rest of the world expanded their borders and established ways of communication and transportation with each other. One by one, civilizations came to terms with the modern world. But the dangerous terrain and harsh climate made it possible for Tibet to remain as it had been for centuries.
Tibet, located in the central, that Russia and China and the British India, all these three countries, so much interested about Tibet. So that's also, I think, try to keep out, foreign influence. So that's, I think, they try to prevent each other, try to do their own interest, their own selfishness, so that's why is, I think. When in Tibet, of course, in transportation, for instance, we have no automobiles, no roads.
On October 7th, 1950, the People's Republic of China forced Tibet's doors open. China called this bloody occupation that killed over 1 million Tibetan people a liberation. The people of Tibet called upon the 15-year-old Dalai Lama, revered as the 14th reincarnation of Buddha, to compromise with the Chinese. The negotiations for peace were unsuccessful. 100,000 Tibetan refugees followed the Dalai Lama into exile in India as they escaped secretly by night in 1959. Millions remained in Tibet, living under Chinese military occupation. Many geographic factors explain Communist China's desire to control Tibet. The Chinese government views Tibet as a strategic bloc to both India and Russia, and has made it a site for Chinese defenses. Tibet possesses the world's largest lithium reserves. There are large deposits of uranium, platinum, coal, iron, jade, and zinc. China sees this as an untapped source of future wealth. Tibet's vast plateau is seen as a place to relocate citizens of the overpopulated Chinese mainland. Since 1951, China has subjected Tibet to industrialization and exploitation of resources. The country has been transformed into a political and military base from which China can use force to bend and shape the Tibetan people and project power and influence into the bordering nations of the Indian subcontinent. So far, China has had little success in remolding Tibetan minds, but striking success in remodeling the face of Tibet.
But the Tibet I know, now what that term I saw in my eye, I think is completely, day and night, completely different. And for instance, Lhasa city, I think not like a Tibetan city, completely any other Chinese city like a Chinese city, no longer, life, population, not like, was, just completely different.
In India, the exiled Dalai Lama and his people have kept alive some of Tibet's rich culture by establishing a government in exile. If they ever return to Tibet, they will find it a very different place. Tibet has been ravaged by the Chinese trespassers. Only a few dozen of Tibet's 6,000 monasteries remain. Forests have been stripped for lumber. Much of the once bountiful wildlife has been exterminated. 1/6 of the population has perished. The old Tibetan civilization has ceased to exist. And all the Tibetans ever wanted was to be left alone.